Welcome to another episode of Bright Insights, the podcast that leads you to less stress and more success. Here's your host, Paul Bright.
Welcome to the episode. The topic, T is for trauma. The bottom line up front is that past trauma can show up when present life circumstances change. Past trauma can show up when present life circumstances change. And you may not see it coming because you have a different set of responsibilities when you're into leadership. And we know that some of you guys out there listening, your leadership is not something that's been part of your life, but you're now the next person up, the next man up, the next woman up. And now that you're in charge and you have greater responsibilities, you might find yourself feeling emotions that you weren't expecting to feel anymore. And if anything that's been testing it, it's been this whole pandemic and getting through it and being isolated. Now a lot of us are starting to return to the workforce. So I decided that I wanted to get some other people to help out and talk about this. And my guest today is Whitney Walker. She is a therapist, a healer, all kinds of nifty, nice roles that people could use in life right now. She's a friend of mine. Full disclosure, we used to work together. We worked with a very highly intense community and population. Wasn't the easiest, but we learned a whole lot working with folks that needed lots of help. And all those experiences helped lead her where she is today. And I'm glad that I was able to connect with you and see this is what you were doing now. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be on my show. Use you. So a little bit of background. When we met, we were both working for a nonprofit organization that helped people that had severe mental health disorders, just trying to get them through systems and services and support while they learn to live and adapt to their world. It's a pretty intense job. And I left, I think you left just before I left about 5 years ago for you,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago, and 3 years ago for me. And so where did you go from there?
So from there, I went to work for another community-based nonprofit. I was working with teens, though. I was working with children and teens who were in crisis. So I worked out of a crisis unit in Campbell, and I worked on a team that was the community transition services team. So children and teens who had been 5150'd for either suicidal or homicidal thoughts or actions were 5150 brought in, and then I helped them to transition back home once they had their hold, they were stable, and I helped them work with their families, getting back into school, and just really helping them to stabilize after such a upsetting event.
Right. Well, that's really nice. That's really nice work that you're doing there, helping them stabilize. And obviously, if they're at 5150, and for those who may not know what that is, it's when you're a threat to yourself or others, you like grave endangerment, authorities or medical people will come out and assess you to see if they need to keep you somewhere safe. And they will, for 3 days or 2 weeks, depending on. And then you kind of come out of that at some point and return back to quote unquote normal life. So helping with that transition is a good thing. And obviously you witnessed other people's trauma through all that, especially with teens. And so now I'm thinking about it. It's like, well, the folks that we worked with were adults and older adults and homeless adults that had severe mental health issues that also experienced trauma. So in a way, you've seen what trauma looks like from the teenage years all the way through adulthood.
Yeah, absolutely. And, working where we did before, and then the work that I did in the crisis unit, I was getting my hours for during both those jobs. And so it really felt like some of the boot camp, the really heavy work that I was doing. I passed my exam and got licensed about 3 years ago, and then started working in more of a private practice setting. And I now own my own practice, which I opened in August. But when we were working together, it was such a enriching and valuable experience, because it was, you're kind of just right there on the front lines. I mean, we were literally out in the community, right?
Yes.
And there was no bounds. Some of the clients that we worked with, you didn't really know what was going to happen when you had to go out on a call and meet with them. You had to meet them where they're at. And sometimes that wasn't a very stable place.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah. You were seeing all, it was such a unique view, and as you said, that job was challenging at times, but I'll always remember it because you don't usually get to see that side or experience.
Right.
People have.
Right. A lot of our folks in our business, they work with the worried well, which is not necessarily bad, but I feel like nowadays, we're starting to see more folks really address past traumas that they've had experienced as kids, as teenagers, as adults, or even what we call vicarious trauma, where maybe you're not the person going through the trauma, but you're seeing it every day from somebody else to the point where you start feeling those symptoms. And that leads into the folks that are this audience and others, where you seem like a functioning adult, you seem like you're doing fine, you're leading, and then all of a sudden, whoa, there's these symptoms and actions that are hitting you for whatever reason. And it's like, what is this like? And to me, sometimes that falls into, well, you are having triggers from past trauma. So what would that look like to somebody if they were having symptoms of past trauma? It's not just the moment. I'm not just mad at the moment. I'm really mad about something else, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. And I would say that, it's hard to ever tease the two apart in terms of how we respond to everyday in the moment events and when it's hitting a nerve from a past trauma. Most things that happen, most responses we have are a little bit connected to our history, the things that have happened to us, the beliefs that we've created based on the events that have happened, and the pain and the emotions that come up when those trauma points are hit upon, which again, everyday events can hit on those things, even if they're not directly related. If there's anything that elicits a memory of it or a response, you can get that stronger trauma response. But in terms of, how do you know because I feel like what we're trying to explore here is, we all want to know, is there something I need to be working on? Is there something I'm not addressing? Is there this trauma from the past that's just haunting me? And I think it's when a response that you have is possibly disproportionate to the event.
Yeah.
So I think we've all been there where something happens. Maybe it's within a relationship or a work or experience, or just something that happens, and there's just this strong visceral response.
Right.
And you can feel like, what is going on? Where is this coming from? Why is this so powerful? And another thing to look out for is that, when trauma operates in three different sectors: in your body, in your mind, and within your being, in your emotions. So if you have something that brings about a visceral physical reaction where you shake or you tremble or, you can't see straight, just any of those things, and you also just get this flood of thoughts or fear, a flight or fight response, that's probably showing that whatever's going on is hitting on something bigger than that present moment.
Right. You're not just mad because of a situation. You're beyond mad or beyond scared or want to isolate. I've seen that happen before too. Yeah, it's very interesting to see all that come up. And part of what you do is recovery coaching. What I was researching, that's pretty neat. With Women Waken, I'll definitely put links so you can get more information from Whitney's work. So what do you tell me about recovery coaching, and what sort of barriers or stigmas do people have when they're starting to feel it out or engage in it?
Yeah, so I've been working in recovery basically since I started pursuing my licensure as a therapist and working as a licensed therapist, because I myself am in recovery. Okay. So I've been sober for 6 years now. Okay. And for years I went through programs and really was invested and really involved in recovery work because I needed some guidance. I needed to do some of the work where you identify your trauma, because there's a popular phrase that says, it's important to check in and ask yourself what's running the show, because often our trauma will quote unquote run the show in terms of our actions and behaviors are sometimes fueled by our past traumas.
Yeah.
They're really taking over and causing us to act in certain ways, one of which often is addiction. We're looking to avoid something or to soothe something that was so painful or shameful or troubling that we don't know how to exist with it. So we try to get outside of it,
right,
through substance abuse. And that was where I found myself, to the point where I had to make the choice to get sober and do that work. So now doing, recovery coaching, my biggest focus is, I just want to hear the person and I want to know where they're at. And I want them to be able to speak honestly, because I think that often in our society, people don't address an addiction until it's so big that you can't ignore it. And it's becoming problematic for the person, but also for other people, right? They're like, hey, you need to change. You need to cut this out. You're going to lose your job. You're going to start losing things. And so then people are finally willing to, address the problem. I'd rather talk to somebody when they're first just starting to question it. And so what I'd love to see is a safer, more open space to people being able to say, you know what, I think I might have a problem. I'm not sure. I don't really know what it looks like. A lot of people don't know what addiction looks like.
right.
And they don't want to talk about it because there's a taboo, there's a stigma around it. So as a recovery coach, I often start with people who are just sort of like, hey, I think something might be up here. I'm not sure.
Right.
Or they might be very well aware and ready to tackle it head on, or they might already be in sobriety and just need a little tune up or a little focus for their sobriety path. So yeah, that's sort of the focus I have. And I would say, as far as, the biggest barriers is, again, the stigma, that people would rather be in denial about having a problem. Just as, people want to be in denial about having trauma, because if you admit that you have an addiction or trauma, that there's something that you need to work on or do something about.
Right.
And that means it can interrupt your life, and it makes you face things that you were trying to run away from in the first place.
Yeah. Very
and
true.
That's not easy.
Very true. Very true. And I've seen, where addiction may not necessarily be substances or food, to cover up trauma or avoid it. There's, to me, achievementaholics. There's workaholics where, constantly hitting achievements and trying to chase the reward or the success to the point where important relationships and their own health is at risk. And to me, that could be just as bad, because again, it's still not facing past trauma and still having an impact in your life. It's well above and beyond. And it's tough with our society, I think, because we put so much emphasis on it. Like I was telling you earlier about, I have a past episode about sleep with, oh, wow, if you're sleeping, then you're not working hard enough. Or we put so much emphasis on success and going up these ladders that it's easy to hide behind trauma under that, or it's easy to hide behind alcoholism when the culture in your workplace is you drink to celebrate.
Totally. And, accomplishment addiction is easy to overlook or to not see, because you get so much attention for it. And we are in a culture where there's such, phrases like the hustle and the grind, and, everybody wants to be, acknowledged for their achievements, and just how like they're doing so much, and they're getting so much momentum and recognition, and they're applauded for it. Yet it doesn't show the things that they're neglecting sometimes in order to do that, which most often is the self. It's very common that people who have gotten some success and want to build on that success will begin to sacrifice, because every single addiction is exactly the same formula, dressed up in a different outfit, right?
Right.
Because the addiction to accomplishment is you get that fix and it feels so good, and then you want more because it comes back. What's next? Some people, just like everything else, have a healthy relationship with accomplishment. Mm-hmm. They get an accomplishment, they're able to absorb it, to take it in, to allow it to sit with them, and they say, wow, I'm so grateful. I feel so good about this. But other people, it's like, just as you said, what's next? Okay, yeah, I got this. And then I got the car and I got the house. I got everything I wanted, but I need more. And, that could be the tagline for our society is more. Right. We're always chasing after the next thing. So again, any unhealthy relationship, whether it's with food or alcohol or sex or gambling, anything can be an addiction.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I've two things. One area I've been exploring, uh, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I talked about that a lot in season one, and I said, in that when you understand it as a leader or in running some sort of organization, when you have a good thorough understanding of that, you can start applying it to your subordinates, and you can start seeing where they're at in their hierarchy of needs, and it's easier to speak to building bonds. If you know that your employees are really struggling with the basics, food, shelter, and clothing, job security, and all that. If you can get a sense of that as you get to know your employees, then you speak more to that, and it helps people move along. I also feel like in some cases that addictions, especially rooted in trauma, they start to take the same equality level as food, as water, as where I'm going to breathe. And so it can be hard for folks to break away from them, even though in one level, yeah, I know I don't need to snort this line or drink this to stay alive. But there's the other half of the brain that's like, no, you have to do this in order to keep going. Do you feel like a lot of that is rooted in some sort of traumatic experience or neglect or?
Yeah. Yeah. So I need to take a moment to give a shout out to
Mhm.
someone who developed a sort of a different route towards recovery, or a different concept of recovery work. And it's called conscious recovery.
Hmm.
His name is TJ Woodward, and he wrote the book Conscious Recovery and has a workbook. But his whole concept is that all addictions are rooted in trauma,
Hmm.
in shame, and spiritual disconnect.
Oh,
So
okay.
take from that what you will, whatever you resonate with, but it's definitely worth checking out, because um, the answer to me is yes, is that we don't act in these obsessive ways unless there's something at the source that is fueling this behavior.
Hmm.
Because I'll say that addiction is not natural. It's not a natural state.
Okay.
It's the result of something that is incredibly painful and uncomfortable, and leading us to seek out other means of feeling some relief. And it's very common. That's why we see drug and alcohol abuse so often in people who are, are celebrities who have reached a certain state of notoriety. It's because first they channeled all their energy into achieving that thing, and they put all their focus and, a lot of their worth into it. I'm going to be the champion. I'm going to do, and if you think that way for years and years, and that's all you care about, one is that, you have your drive, you have your motivation, you have your focus, you're putting your energy into that. But the other is you're kind of basing your worth based on that goal. You're saying, if I reach that, it determines that I'm worthy. So then we're coming back to the trauma part. The biggest thing about trauma is it makes us question our worthiness.
Right.
Something happens to us that we have shame about, that we were hurt. We were so badly hurt.
Yeah.
And it makes us wonder, how could this have happened? Is it okay? Am I safe? And all of these things are so unpleasant to question and ask that we will give anything to have a different focus.
Yeah.
And so again, for someone who is highly achieving, and they'll go after this goal just vehemently, and then once they achieve it, they don't know what to do. It happens all the time that people reach the highest levels of achievement, and then they just devolve into addiction because they want that high back. They need their other fix, and they got to the highest level they could within their realm, and now they don't know what to do.
Wow, that's key, especially for folks like in leadership, because you're going to start achieving levels, you're going to start moving up the ladder, and there may be pressures from other people who are facing their own issues to say, you got to keep going, or or what was that in Talladega Nights, second place is first loser, or if you ain't first, you're last, those type of things. And what an interesting movie to reflect on trauma and the success and achievement is Talladega Nights, but
Never
it,
know
but
find
yeah,
the valuable nuggets.
yeah.
Wisdom.
Yeah, you often can. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, what's next? And I feel like if your perspective when you're leading is like, I'm just going to keep making everyone else better, or this organization better to the best of my ability. If you move it up an inch, that's success. If you move it up 2 inches, that's even more success. Have you worked with clients that are in leadership positions, and what are some examples of past traumas, if you have, that they've had or that they've tried to get recovery through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, working in Silicon Valley, and for, the 2 years after I got licensed, I worked in a psychiatry clinics, and I would see 7 or 8 clients a day. And so and they would just give me whoever came by, right? I still wasn't specialized. I knew that I was going to focus on addiction and substance abuse because that's, so much of my personal history and focus. But I would just take whatever clients, and, I got a lot of people with trauma, and, a lot of the clients that I got that had reached high levels of success, were seeing me for this exact reason, which was they were starting to notice that nothing was ever enough. That they had this great goal of wanting to make $1 million. And then it was, well, when are you going to make $12 million? And then it was, well, when are you going to do better than this person? And so, and just as you said, everything else starts to fall away. These people aren't sleeping. These people aren't taking care of themselves. They've lost a lot of their joy because the only thing that matters is more, achieving more. And, when they have that kind of pressure, that kind of pressure just starts to manifest itself physically in many ways, health issues, chronic issues, just in a lot of different ways. Your body's trying to tell you, like, I can't take this.
Yeah.
But in our culture now, we say, too bad. We've really become very detached from listening to our bodies.
Yeah.
And I think especially people once in a leadership position who are getting that, they're moving fast and that people are taking notice. They don't want to do that. They don't want to listen. And especially, again, they don't want to listen if there's some serious trauma in there that's really kind of barking at them, because how inconvenient is that?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
You can't just keep grinding away and chasing after, this momentum and success if you've got some deep pain that isn't being heard.
Very true. Very true. I will say, and this is not to ignore people who have fallen to COVID-19 or who have, experienced it or lost people through this pandemic. And this is not to ignore all that. We know that that's serious. We've lost a lot of people. But I will say that in what I've seen in the positive in office culture and work culture with the shutdown is I feel like we're starting to synergize more as people in an organization and not just here's the manager, here's the owner, here's the supervisor, because all of us had to experience that and some form of isolation together. And so the level of humanness that's coming in, which I like about things that have happened, and hopefully this is going to spark people to start really not feeling so stigmatized for what they dealt with, because we're all dealing with this isolation in some way, shape, or form together.
Yeah. It is. It's like you see them in a more humanistic way. The more that we're able to look at each other and recognize, oh, we're all just here having a human experience. We all have things happen to us that are inconvenient and goofy and silly and frustrating. And I think that when we all are working or working through or dealing with a common struggle, which this was, right? The pandemic, we all had to get resourceful. We all had to shift things up and figure out how are we going to move through this? And it no longer, as you said, was as tiered as far as like, okay, well, they're going to do their thing, I'll do mine. Everyone had to kind of start collaborating and connecting. Mm-hmm. And I think there absolutely have been silver linings. And I think it's okay to say that. Sometimes silver linings come in the form of great struggle and sometimes loss, because it's an indication that the way things are going are not working.
Yeah.
And there's a shift happening. There's adjustments, and adjustments are always challenging. Change is challenging, yet change needs to happen because the direction we're going isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
What we've been talking about as far as people just needing to go higher, 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 eventually you topple over, and we don't want to topple over. We want to be able to move forward together and to feel, that feeling of connection is the greatest feeling in the world.
Yes.
When you feel like you're understood and you understand the person next to you, and there's not this sort of hierarchy in terms of like, oh, well, they're up here, so they're better than.
And we've all, in the one more common trauma now is grief that we're experiencing. Either we lost a coworker, we lost a family member, we lost how we work. So I think this isolation has also hit people to grieve loss at different levels. And that's a trauma that I think we can all relate to. And so understanding, hey, it's okay not to be okay because of all this is definitely going to be helpful. So I suspect you're going to be seeing folks that, grief is trauma,
Yeah. And the more that we allow for people to show up exactly as they feel and to be grieving, the quicker we'll be able to move through it, because that's exactly what healing from trauma looks like. It means allowing for it to be seen.
Yes.
And grief is a form of trauma. It's you lost something that was important to you. And there's so many forms of grief that have occurred in the past year, whether because it's loss of lifestyle, loss of something that was enjoyable to you, loss of human connection, teens and young adults who lost their high school or college experience, just all these things that, and people who lost family members, of course, all of this. There's a loss there. There's a grief. And if we don't allow for the grieving to happen, it literally just sits within us. It just sits there. It's like this thing it's just kind of like it becomes a rock.
Yeah.
And it weighs heavy on your heart because it's saying, hey, I need to be acknowledged. Our emotions need to be acknowledged, to be pushed through and expressed. And once they're expressed, we can move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I joked a lot that in the middle of the pandemic, I was like, I'm crying at a Taylor Swift song. I'm really crying right now at a Taylor Swift song. I don't even like her music, but here I am. But I didn't say it was wrong. I said, this means I need to talk about something, or I need to do something, because this is a real feeling and I'm going to embrace it, but I need to do something about this. And this was my signal, was that I was crying at a Taylor Swift song. I was like,
really?
Yeah, it's a sign of,
And yeah, it is a sign. You asked, like, how can people know when it's trauma? And especially when we're talking about people in leadership, I remember working with one specific individual who had pushed themselves so hard past the point of even looking at the thing. She was being traumatized on a daily basis based on the work she was doing, but she was gaining, growth and speed in her work. And so she didn't want to stop, but she literally started losing control of her body and her emotions. To cry to Taylor Swift song, that's one thing. That's sort of like, you're like, okay, I need to have some emotions I want to look at. Yeah. But it was like, she would just start uncontrollably sobbing, driving for no reason. Wow. And she couldn't sleep at all. She lost control of her bodily functions. Like, it was severe. And that's what can happen when you just keep pushing yourself and avoid trauma at all costs, when you're not looking at your emotions. And again, it's in leadership, you can get this mentality of I need to do this for the company. I need to do this for the organization. I need to do this for my employees. And we think it's okay to neglect ourselves. That's another huge issue we've got going on here, is that we've decided that self-care is selfish. Not the same thing at all.
Anything at all.
I like to offer the term for people who are uncomfortable with the idea of self-care is to nurture yourself. Think of it as self-nurturing. And I tell my clients who are, they're entrepreneurs and they're very, go-getters, and they want to achieve. If you can't think of yourself that way, look around you, go into nature, look at a tree.
Yeah.
Is it selfish for a tree to need healthy soil to grow in, to need rain and water to grow, to need sunlight? No, that's just so it can stay alive. And what does it do when it's alive and flourishing? It gets to give off oxygen so that we can live, that other elements and other creatures can live. That's not selfish. And we are no different in that regard. Right. If we're not taking care of our basic needs and nurturing ourselves, we cannot give love and help and assistance and guidance and service to others.
Absolutely. And you think about, even if in terms of business, the return of investment, if you had to spend, like, you started recognizing, okay, you know what, my reactions to things are getting a little out of hand. There's probably some trauma I haven't identified. I'm going to need to take some time. Well, do I have the time? Yeah. If you invest an hour or two a week out of your 40, 60-hour work week, and you know that by 8 weeks, 12 weeks, you'll have at least a look at it and some sort of handle on it. Imagine how much more productive and how much more helpful, how much of a better and bigger and stronger leader you would be after investing that amount of time. Because people will take money, their capital that they've raised or investment that they've raised, and invest in a system that may take 2, 3, 4 years to develop and be beneficial to everyone. But taking this amount of time for yourself to address the trauma, I think is definitely a bigger return of investment. Even taking 10 minutes to go for a walk every day out of your hour that you normally wouldn't do that. If it's going to give you some fresh air to come back and see things a little more clear instead of being at the edge of fight or flight, that's a return of investment. That's definitely worth it. So, yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of a quote I like. It's associated with Abraham Lincoln. Sometimes you never know who quotes are really by. Yeah. But it said, if I had 10 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 9 hours sharpening my axe. And to me, I think that's helpful for people who kind of have, like, no pun intended, but like a cutthroat mentality, is that look at the fact that if you're a vessel of creation. When you're a leader, you're wanting to inspire people, you're guiding people, you are leading people. How can you do that if your channel, your vessel that you're working through is not at optimal performance?
Right.
You're not sleeping and you're not taking care of yourself and you have this trauma that's not dealt with. There's a lot of constriction in what you're able to, what your output can be, because you're not optimally operating. You're hurt, you're sick in a way, you're in a state of sick condition if you have unaddressed trauma or pain.
Absolutely. I was fortunate when early in my military career, like this is when it first started showing up in me, was I was going through these bouts of depression and I didn't know what was happening. I just knew I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want, anything that was already rigorous, like basic training, like you pretty much told when to pee, so it was easy to get through that because you have no control, but you want to be in there and it's only short time. And then you have the follow-on school where you have more time to yourself. And that's when things were starting to hit me. It was like, what is this feeling? And there was always this stigma, and it's still there of like, if you go seek mental health, you're going to lose your military career and all that stuff. No, I went and got help and got a little bit of a look at it. And then it hit me again, like a year and a half later. And I got some more help and I was still able to stay in. And then I even had some, I wouldn't necessarily say they were traumatic experiences, a few more years into my career, because everybody assumes like the military is like, oh, you were in combat, you got hit by something, shrapnel, you witnessed it. That wasn't what happened to me. But I had experienced some things that totally challenged some past trauma that I didn't know I had, that was coming out as anxiety. It was coming out as more depression. And it took me to go in and seek some even more help to say, that's what it is. And when I was able to address it head on and get removed from a position that I no longer need to be in, I was actually able to lead better and lead my, the folks under me better. I was able to lead my family better because I was more clear as to what I was dealing with, to the point where I knew I cannot stay in the service anymore. Nothing against the service, but it was time for me to separate and pursue this mental health career. All because I was fortunate to have the support that I needed to address some traumas that I didn't realize were going to affect me once I was moving up in leadership. And it's a very structured system in the military. There's still some of the stigmas like, well, if you didn't retire with this certain rank or you didn't stay in 20, then, what did you do? But if anybody's ever been in that sort of lifestyle, it's a little intense. Just to get through a month is hard,
Oh yeah. I can only imagine.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, all this conversation about not dealing with trauma and then being in leadership positions. And you've experienced it because you've seen leaders that were going through these type of deals. So yes, recovery and addressing it head on and getting into it early, I believe.
Yes.
That's a huge.
Yes. And I love that you're speaking to that, Paul. The more people that speak openly about their experience and are honest about it, the more people can still feel safe, because the most upsetting and also pivotal point is what you just described, is that moment where you recognize something's wrong. Because again, as we spoke of earlier, nobody wants to be in that place. Nobody wants to say, uh-oh, there's something here.
Yeah.
And, trauma is almost like, it's like something got in there. It's like a piece of shrapnel got in. And if you let it sit there, it's the same if you let a piece of shrapnel stay in your body. Like if you keep it in there, your body is going to want to reject it. It's going to have a strong response. It's going to be painful. It's going to be trying to push it out because it's a foreign object, right? And the same with trauma. When trauma comes in, our brain is saying, this wasn't right. This was bad. This was scary. And so we try to ignore it. And so meanwhile, it's just creating this life force of pain and anger and all these confusing emotions. So just as you said, if you don't get to it early, it really starts to grow and fester.
Right.
So it is important to look at it early, and that we can have the courage to say, I'm not bad because this thing happened to me. And I think that's why people don't address trauma, is because we associate when terrible things happen to us, that maybe that means we're terrible. And and that's where the shame comes in. Things happen to us. I work with a lot of clients who were the victims of sexual abuse, and even clients who were abused as children. And that is one of the most powerful forms of shame that someone can ever experience, because you can't make sense as a child that you could be treated that way, or what that might mean about you, or why somebody would want to do that to you. Right. So you keep it pushed down, and it really just takes on a life of its own based in fear and shame. And that's just so detrimental to a human being.
Yeah. I remember watching a weight loss competition show. It was very popular on the network. And there was a guy who, everybody on there were, they had eating issues. They were, morbidly obese in cases. And one of the guys seemed like he was pretty jovial. He was pretty happy. He's like excited about the competition. But one thing he realized after listening to people's stories there, he goes, I didn't realize I was abused as a child until I came here. He goes, because I thought it was normal. The discipline that he was getting, he thought it was normal. Yet here he was, whatever he blocked out of that memory still took form in overeating as some sort of form of protection. That leads me to thinking about that book, The Body Keeps the Score, that I read.
Yes,
I read that. Yeah, it's a great book. And it's definitely something that I want to put out there. I do this a lot with the population I work with now. If you experience things when you were young before you can even talk, if there were traumatic events that happened to you, whether you were involved in some sort of like weather event, whether you witnessed something before you could even formulate the words or make sense of it, your nervous system will remember that. Your nervous system can remember that before you can even put words to it. And that can sometimes be a traumatic event that drives you into places you didn't realize you were going. So that's something to keep in mind. If you feel like you're out there and you're feeling like you're having traumatic experience, trauma symptoms like we've been describing here, but you can't think off the top of your head, well, what happened to me? Because I remember the rest of my, from when I was 8 till however I am now, I don't remember anything happening. You might want to check with your family history. You might want to check with some relatives, some friends that may remember and may put some context into what happened to you. Because we are talking a bit about these things more now as a society, but definitely not 10 years ago, definitely not 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And, that's a great time to make an appointment with a therapist or a coach or anybody who might seem safe to explore these kind of questions with. And, I'll say that as a therapist, that's the greatest honor and the most sacred moments is when you're able to just hold the space for someone to really kind of let go a little and just look into that. Yeah. Look into, is there something that they're holding that they haven't let themselves see? Is there something from the past that they didn't realize had a different meaning than they thought? And because it's a very disconcerting thing. It can, people often when they recognize traumas that happened early in life, later in life, it can really change their concept of what they thought was true about themselves, their childhood. And that's alarming.
Yes. It's shocking to look back because in the family sense, like you don't want to find out if the relative you cared about was the one that did something to you, or was a piece of that trauma, or maybe they were in some sort of addiction and you've never known them out of it. But the things that happened to you was while they were in addiction, while they were in their own trauma, man, we could go on about generational trauma and how that gets passed down. I mean, it can go on and on and on and on, But it's definitely important to recognize that there's a shot. If things are out of sorts with you, especially now that you're in leadership and you have more responsibilities and your eyes are on a lot more lives at some level. There's definitely something to explore. It's part of the self-care, self-nurturing, as you would say.
Yeah. And I definitely emphasize finding a professional resource when you start to, because that trying to navigate that on your own can be incredibly scary and upsetting and lonely, and having someone who can offer a bit of guidance and walking you through that can be so critical.
Right. And that would be like the one thing, because usually I'll maybe say, here's some practical things you can do. But honestly, that's really it, is seek out a professional source, professional listeners. We're our professional listeners. We can help folks like us in this field, whether it's a life coach, whether it's a trusted person in your spiritual communities. We are the ones that I would say are the first stop, just to go to. It doesn't mean like your whole life is a wreck and you might find out that maybe parts of your life were a wreck. It doesn't automatically equate that. I would rather know than not know. It's only going to lead you to less stress and more success, as I say a lot.
Well, what it leads you to is freedom.
Yeah.
Because what you're finding is the truth. And the truth, as cliched as it is, but the truth will set you free. Yes. Because so long we run away from the truth. We don't want to find the truth because it's too scary, but it's the one thing that will allow us to be free of the fears, of the hurt, of the shame that we might have been feeling.
This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for agreeing to help me out here, help my listeners out here. Let's give me some contact information that they can take away.
Totally. So I have a website. It's womenwaken.com. You can also email me at whitney@womenwaken.com. I would love to hear from anybody. I do offer therapy, of course, recovery coaching. I do also have a strong spiritual work component. I do tarot readings, among other things, to help people with some spiritual guidance and insight. And I would love just to hear if anybody has any thoughts about our conversation today, or is looking for some resources around trauma, or looking how to take those first steps into addressing trauma, because it's so important. And I do want to give two things. When it comes to working on trauma, somatic therapy is really wonderful. That's sort of the work where you do talk therapy, but also it's about body awareness, mindfulness, and accessing deep emotional pain within the body. So it's really doing like the mind and body work. So somatic is a great term to use when you're seeking out trauma-based therapy. And also EMDR.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know EMDR, but that's a way of working with individuals who have had a really one specific event that was very traumatizing, and it can help them kind of release the emotional reactions and attachment they have to that event.
One question before we go. So womenwaken.com. I assume you're not just working with women in this?
I'm not. No, I work with men and women. Absolutely. The idea behind that is it's more about the feminine energy, the divine feminine specifically, which is everything that we've just discussed. So both all genders and sexes have both energies. It's just the yin and the yang, right? It's the masculine, which is a lot about production and achievement and innovation, which are wonderful things. But we also need the balance of the feminine, which is about grounding and nurturing and harmony and love and compassion. And, look around and you can see that there's more presence of one than the other right now in our world.
That's true.
So my work with Women Waken is really looking to restore balance and allow people to tap more into their natural divine feminine attributes, which, to your point about everything we've talked about today about trauma, which is that trauma is not meant to be experienced alone. And, we talked about generational trauma. One person's trauma is all of our traumas, because trauma affects everybody. And the sooner we can see that we're not so separate as we think, we're all very much connected in some way. So when one of us is suffering, it's important for all of us to work together and to allow others to be seen, Absolutely. To allow their trauma to be seen. And, I believe that someday it'll be the norm that when somebody has a traumatic event, they're held in a safe space by their community or by, the ones that they love. And we let go of that shame. And the last thing I'll say is that it's about releasing our dependence on externals and looking more to ourselves.
No, we need to be more instead of do more. Thanks again for coming on and giving us your knowledge.
Thank you, Paul, for having me. This was wonderful. I hope it was helpful to the listeners. And again, I hope that if anybody's struggling with trauma or questioning it, or addiction for that matter, anything, to seek out professional help and to know that you're not alone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bright Insights. For more information on how to have less stress and more success, visit brightinsightsmedia.com.
If you enjoyed this episode in particular, or the Bright Insights podcast overall, subscribe and share with your friends. That gives us a little more visibility. And with that, we can all have less stress and more success.
Tramp Loop Media.